Benji Walton, a really interesting piece from Time.com about Hamas manipulates casualties as propaganda. The Palestinian Center for Human Rights reports that males ages 17 to 30 make up much of the fatalities. PCHR labels these men as civilians when many of them likely aren't. Similar disputes arose in 2009. PCRH reported that 236 combatants had been killed, but in 2010, Hamas came out saying actually they had lost between 600 and 700 fatalities during the conflict. I'm not quite figuring out what, but how many kids? Well, why don't you link to the piece first off instead of just to time.com? Because I'm very curious as to who wrote it. I would have to read it, but how many kids would be okay? I mean, okay, we know that the UN says 70% approximately are civilians. I'm curious as to how many would be okay. I mean, you don't believe... but my thoughts are maybe it's 50%. Maybe it's 40%. I mean, aside from just the casualties, we all know what the reality of the situation is there. Israel does not face an existential threat. It simply does not. We have seen Hamas fire their full complement of ordinances into Israel. And we've also seen people get incredibly offended at the idea that the FAA would not fly flights in there because it's perfectly safe. Now, I understand there are people in shelters in Israel. But you cannot expect to subjugate a people for this long and live as if your life is going to be totally normal. Sorry. That's just human nature. We can go back in time and talk about morality and talk about what the Arabs did and what the Jews did, and but the reality is, just on the most pragmatic of level, you cannot do X and expect no reaction.
I also just am still, I mean, again, just follow basic logic. Do you think that potentially, as an example, would like Saddam Hussein's regime attempt propaganda coups about civilian casualties when we invaded Iraq? Sure. But what's the underlying reality? That if you bomb with massive ordinances a heavily civilian populated area, you're going to kill a lot of civilians. That's right. Period.
Right.
And that's why it should survive the highest possible scrutiny, which this on its face does not, unless you believe in insane conspiracy theory. Like, I heard someone say that these tunnels are the groundwork of a secret army that Hamas is going to send and take over Israel. That's not cogent thinking. That's illogical and that's irrational, and talk with your therapist about it. But that's not reality. Reality is they shoot some rockets in. That's terrible. Fine. Nothing could justify
that
this level.
Thousands of fighters could stream out of those tunnels, one person at a time.
Yes, exactly.
And that Israel does not have the capacity to basically get any type of warning that that people are coming through these tunnels?
So what I would say is, in this conversation, no. If you and I were working on a script to pitch to Michael Bay, yes. That might actually be a great concept.
The one thing that they would need, of course, would be either some type of force field situation so that when they come out of the tunnel one at a time, the Israelis can't sit there with machine guns and fire at them, or some type of cloaking device. Now, nobody brings that up, and that's interesting.
Muslims are very advanced in cloaking technology, which you wouldn't think because of their lack of Nobel Prizes, which is, of course, another reason that has been used to justify bombing the fuck out of Gaza. Excuse my language.